Welcome to Bake to the Future. The wholesale baking industry mixes tradition and innovation to feed the world and the economy, generating some major dough while employing nearly 800,000 people in the U.S. We bring you a fresh take on the latest trends and issues impacting the baking sector through exclusive insights and conversations. Brought to you by the American Bakers Association, who will take you bake to the future.
Hi, welcome everyone. I'm Haley Blumenreich.
And I'm Katie Jewell.
And today on the show, we're here to help explain the unprecedented supply chain challenges and increasing costs facing the baking industry.
It's a big episode with lots to discuss and understand, and it's the first of many that we're going to have talking about these urgent issues. Joining us today are ABA's in-house experts, President and CEO Robb MacKie, and Senior Vice President of Government Relations and Public Affairs, Lee Sanders. So first, Robb, we'll start with you. What is going on?
That's a great question, Katie. And it's really hard to, put your finger on it. Just speaking broadly, every single input cost for the industry seems to be pegging out or very close to pegging out. We could talk about the workforce issues. That's one issue which we'll save for another day when we've got more time. But what we're seeing is on the commodity front, every single commodity that the industry uses. Now, each one is different. There's a different reason, different cause, but for some reason they are all, up, some cases to record levels. And it's not just ingredients. It's ingredients, it's packaging, it's equipment, the materials that go into the equipment, every single thing that the industry touches. Clearly, COVID has had a significant impact on supply chain. But there's also significant government policies that are exacerbating the challenge at this moment in time.
And so, Lee, you're the government relations person in addition to Robb. What are some of the things that are happening with the government, the administration, that's making this situation worse for the input costs to go up?
Okay, good question. I kind of look at this, and Robb and I have seen it before on a different scale. I think of it as almost like a perfect storm. We have a lot of different pressures that are on the industry. And so certainly the commodity volatility, which I'm sure we'll get into later, but then you've got a new administration, you've got a new Congress, and they have priorities and issues that they want to push on. And so, they've made some progress with regard to the rescue plan and additional unemployment extensions. And so that certainly is impactful when we're looking at the workforce, incentivizing folks to go back to work rather than stay home and get government money. And so, that's a big issue, a big hurdle when we already were having workforce challenges before even COVID.
And you're right, Lee. I know, Robb, you said you wanted to kind of talk about that some other time, but I think that will be a part of this conversation because I think it is a big, big part of what's going on. It might be the easiest to resolve in the short term, perhaps. So, Robb, everyone's hair is on fire right now. So give me a sense and give our audience a sense of what is going on and maybe some anecdotes that you've heard. You don't have to use names, but give us a sense of what you are hearing.
No, Katie, you're absolutely right. It is, and we pride ourselves in being calm, cool, and collective in the eye of the storm. And, we've seen that certainly over the last year plus with COVID. But when I say this, it is code red out there right now. And again, each sector of, commodity, equipment, packaging, has its own story to tell. But, I go back 12 years ago when we were in the height of the wheat crisis, the grain crisis, and the price of flour was up 154%. And, and literally changing every day. And what's interesting is if you look at the spot market today for the wheat that we use, the price of wheat is right back to where it was when the industry was up in arms, 12 years ago. And so that's an issue which translates into higher flour prices. But what we've got is, and I keep telling this story, we actually have a shortage of wheat gluten, the protein that makes baked goods, so nutritious. We have a shortage.
So I'm going to stop you there because I've been trying to explain why to other people, and I don't understand how it works. So how can there be, if we have so much wheat in this country, and I know in a normal year, we export like 50% of our wheat. Doesn't gluten come from wheat, and how can there be a shortage? Is it because we import it?
Yes, that's a big piece of it. And so then we can talk about all the global supply chain issues at ports and things like that are leading to that. But we have, over the years, our domestic production of gluten, not wheat, but gluten, has declined. And so we are now more dependent upon international sources from Australia, Argentina, other places that take the wheat and make the vital wheat gluten that is, again, critical to make, a loaf of bread, or, a cake, all of those types of things. And so, and I hear myself talking to folks about, a gluten shortage, and I can't believe those words are coming out of my mouth. But that just tells you, how serious this is. Again, another big issue is, and we could probably spend the rest of the podcast talking about this, but we have a shortage, and we may actually have an availability challenge when it comes to vegetable oils, edible vegetable oil that we use, the soybean oils that the industry uses to create the healthier profile products that consumers want. And, obviously, the farmers need to grow more soybeans. We need to have refining capacity, but we're also competing with the federal government mandates that are being accelerated under this administration for the next generation of clean diesel. Now, as a major transportation sector in the country, we're all for cleaner diesel and things like that. The problem, as Lee said, we have a perfect storm right now. And so the demand is far exceeding the amount of supply, and probably will be that way for the next year or two.
Well, and I would say with the biodiesel and the renewable diesel and the demand there, that's not going to go away. That's probably going to double in the next 2 years. So this is, we need to think about strategy for the long term and how that's going to impact our members. Every commodity is different. Commodity volatility is something that our members deal with daily with the markets. And it all depends on each commodity. It depends on each crop. It depends on each season. And so, I was heartened to see this morning that the Wheat Quality Council, they're out doing their hard winter wheat tour, and the yield that they're expecting, that they're measuring right now, at least right now, for the winter wheat crop is 59.2 bushels per acre, which was up. They had expected about 52 bushels an acre. So that's positive. And so we have to, let the crops play out. Let's see what the acreage does. But certainly for soybeans and the demand for fuel versus food, we've seen this before, but it's a whole new ball game. It's on a whole different level than what we've seen in the past.
Yeah, and I would jump in. Obviously there's an impact on bakers. What we're very concerned about is, and we've already started to see it. You see the inflation numbers for food, which tends to be one of the more volatile indicators, sort of like energy prices and things like that. But we've already seen, I think the last numbers that were reported were about a 2 to 3% increase in food inflation. If some of the things that are coming, that number could double and maybe triple. And so the concern is at a time when many folks in our country are struggling, and the economy is starting, more broadly to start to pull out, the consumers are going to get hit, with a much higher food bill. And a lot of it is, some of these things are just out of, typically with commodities, some things you can control, some things you can't. But, some of the things, the policies that are driving some of that, I think we need to find a relief valve to give us a little bit of time. As Lee said, let the market catch up, let the plantings catch up, let the refining capacity catch up, but But we're very concerned from a consumer perspective. And so because at some point, those costs that get built in or baked in, if you will, they have to go somewhere. And we all know what a thin margin the baking business is. We know what thin margins retailers have. And so at some point, there's going to be a price to pay, by consumers. And I don't think any of us wants that. And, in this very volatile climate that we're in right now, where everything and people are all on edge, that's sort of the last thing we want. And as you know very well, we have been very clear about messaging for the last year and a half. There's an abundant supply of reasonably priced food products. And now we're starting to see, worst case scenario, a best case scenario is a significant food inflation. Worst case scenario, we actually start to see shortages on grocery store shelves. And nobody wants that. And we just need a little bit of time and help, I think, to take, like I said, just a relief valve, take some of that pressure off some of these key commodities so that the market can adjust. The global supply chain can, readjust from the effects of the pandemic, all of that.
Yeah, one of the things that I would mention too, Katie, you had asked about, looking at policies and what we can do. One of the good things is, based on one of the executive orders that President Biden put out on supply chains, USDA has a notice out, and they've asked for comments back on supply chain security. And so that's going to be a great opportunity for us to talk with him, with the agency rather, about the hurdles that we're seeing, concerns that we have, so that those officials can take that into account when they're thinking about their policies moving forward. It's such a big issue. They only gave a 30-day comment period, and now they've extended that an extra 30 days, which is terrific for us, because that gives us, we'll be able to make more robust comments and really think through the issue as we continue to analyze that.
And I would go even further, Lee. We can come up with very sort of surgical solutions that could be implemented in a short period of time. And we've also had similar conversations with the Food and Drug Administration. We talk to them on a regular basis, at least seems like weekly. And one of the questions that they ask us is to give them a sense of the playing field, what's going on out, in the real world, with pricing, with food safety, a whole litany of issues. And when we started talking to them probably about a month ago about the challenges that we were seeing in the supply chain and the input costs that were coming, they're very concerned about what that impact is going to be for food security. And I will tell you, the last thing, I don't care what their political stripes are, the last thing any politician wants is to have to answer why people's food prices are going up. So, our hope is that, working collaboratively with the administration, with members of Congress, with our members, obviously, they need to help be the message carriers, that we can get that word out and hopefully avoid some of that, or at least explain what's going on so it doesn't get too out of control.
Thanks for sharing that. Can you walk us through exactly how the different elements at play are impacting ABA members and how that will get down to the potential price increases for consumers?
So, there's not a direct line. So, if today the price of wheat is north of $7 a bushel, there's obviously milling that goes on. And so there's some efficiencies that happen. So it's not a direct cost increase. But when you start to see, when a baker bought 6 months ago, they bought flour at one price and now it's 20 to 30% higher. Or if they're buying a little bit ahead of schedule, depending on their procurement system, and they're looking at a 50% increase, the baker will find other ways to absorb some of that cost, but if it's a marginal cost, they can do that. When you're looking at a significant cost increase, and that's one ingredient, obviously it's the biggest ingredient, but then you start talking about, the edible oils, the soybean oils that we use, and you're seeing, again, similar percentage increases. Every one of those, ticks up. We were on a call the other day with a group of suppliers, and I'll be honest with you, I never even would have thought of this, but we've all seen the reports about lumber prices, are just way off the charts. And one of the suppliers said that when they ship a piece of equipment, it could be a mixer, it could be whatever they're shipping, they have to crate it up so that it can be shipped. And that price of that lumber, which is now 300, 400, 500% of what it used to be, that gets added in, to the piece of equipment. And so all of these different elements are just layering on. And so the consumer is feeling that.
So here's another explanation too, Haley, on the gluten and how it's used. So if you have higher rain, higher moisture coming in for those crops, then you're going to have more yield. Typically, when you have more yield, your protein levels are lower. And so that's when you have to add the gluten so that you can have, what bakers really like is stability when they're mixing and baking. And so they need a certain level. And so sometimes they're having to add that gluten in. Right now, there's been rain out in the wheat growing areas. And so you've got the yield that's up. So that tells me that potentially we're going to need more gluten. And right now there's no domestic gluten sources out there. But then if for some reason, let's say you have a drought, you have lower acreage, but you're going to have a higher protein level, you're not going to use as much gluten. So with every year, every crop cycle is different.
And I don't think most consumers realize that, and despite the great efforts of the supply chain for the baking industry, every truckload or, rail car load of flour has, different specifications to it. And so Leah is absolutely right. Just simple adjustments in moisture level in the field when the wheat's being grown requires, to get, to add more gluten in or less gluten. And so one of the things that we work very closely with the millers and the wheat growers is to talk about quality. Yield is great. I totally understand that, but bakers will pay more for a consistent, higher quality wheat coming out of the ground. And there are ways, the varieties that they can do that, because if they're getting a higher quality, higher protein wheat, then they don't have to pay to add as much gluten. So, there's a benefit to that. But that's an ongoing process with our wheat grower partners.
So, and another element that you have with regard to, let's say, gluten is right now, so you need to import it. Well, there's a container shortage. So those big containers that you see on barges that come across when they're coming in for imports, there's a shortage of those. So China owns many of those. When things are getting shipped into the United States, all different, not just food, but all different kinds of ingredients and supplies, those typically would be filled up and then sent out. So the things that we're exporting, but right now those are being sent back empty to China at their request. And so that's causing us to have a backup and a hard way to get things into the country. And then when they are getting to these ports, there's a bottleneck because there's so many ships trying to get into the port. And then that's where COVID does play in, because they're short-staffed at those ports at customs. And so that is another element to the perfect storm, is the issue with the logistics.
You made my segue for me, because Rob mentioned trucks and rails. You mentioned shipping containers and boats, which also lends itself to the next segue, which we'll get to in a sec, about workforce and truck drivers and all of that good stuff. Who wants to tackle talking about the trucking situation and the rail situation?
I'll jump in, but I defer to Lee to correct me where I'm wrong. But I think the trucking issue is probably the easier one. And one of the things that we were successful last year was working with the Department of Transportation to get some flexibility. We treated it like a natural disaster, weather-related emergency, like a snowstorm during COVID, where you could extend hours to allow truck drivers to be on the road a little longer without seeing a diminished reduction, in terms of safety. So we had a lot of flexibility in terms of load weights and a whole bunch of things. So we need to keep those extended because, again, we have a very, very tight trucking issue. The other piece of it is, just like in baking and manufacturing, there is a very aggressive shortage of truck drivers. And, we've been pursuing federal policies that would allow more flexibility to bring in, younger drivers, if you will, on a pilot program. But there is, you look at the American Trucking Association's website, and you've got all the data in the world to see we don't have enough truck drivers to distribute products. Rail, I don't think it's quite as significant in terms of the impact of the workforce. But on rail, you have other issues like location and geography. But I think what I have heard and read and learned is one of the big issues is at the ports themselves is not only a shortage of workers at the ports to offload and load, but because there are still, particularly in California, which is where most of the Chinese or Asian inbound products come from, the Port of LA, the Port of Long Beach, they're under pretty much COVID level lockdowns, and because they're in California. And so I think there's a lot of conversation about what can be done, whether it's vaccinations or whatever the protocol is, to open up that capacity to allow more folks in, to work and to be able to move that, offload those ships or load those ships much more efficiently and kind of get back to where things were pre-COVID. So it's such a multifaceted, it's like pushing down on a balloon. You put your finger down on what you think the problem is, and then all of a sudden you see stuff popping up elsewhere. So I don't want people to come away thinking this is going to be an easy fix or an easy group of fixes. There's going to be a variety of different things, but I would say most importantly, it's just greater flexibility all through the entire logistics supply chain.
And, when we're talking about policy, the infrastructure packages that the president has unveiled recently, one of the concerns that we have is that only about 20 to 25% of the spending in those in the infrastructure package is focused on those roads, bridges, rail. And so there's a lot of other elements there that don't have anything really to do with traditional infrastructure. And so I think that those things can be helpful, especially with the rail system, with the highways and their maintenance. Certainly, we had that issue in Memphis with the bridge. And so those kind of things are really important to maintain. But that's only part of it. And so the workforce is certainly so important. The driver shortage is one that really, really has been impacting us along with our regular, facility staff. And so, the pilot program that Robb mentioned, the Drive Safe Act, is something that ABA is a supporter of. It would allow like an apprenticeship type of program to allow younger drivers to come in before they're 21, be partnered with a seasoned driver, and then that would encourage them to select that as a career, truck driving. And so that way you don't lose them in those gap years where they might move on to a different field, a different career. And we have, the baking industry is terrific. There are wonderful companies, wonderful benefits. And so just making sure that we don't lose a great pool of candidates is so important.
And it sounds like a lot of the issues that were already going on have been kind of exacerbated with the recent extra challenges. Because I remember truck driver shortage has been a long time issue for the industry.
No, you're absolutely right. We've mentioned many times that COVID has been an accelerant for trends. It's also been a fuel for some of the inherent structural challenges, that we've had across the board. And in addition, obviously COVID has slowed down, a lot of the supply chain, the global supply chain infrastructure. And so, COVID directly and indirectly has just exacerbated the challenges. And 3 months is now coming on a year and a half. And yes, things are getting better on that front. But, you just have new muscle memory. You've had to rewire the entire supply chain through COVID to make sure you're protecting those essential employees, making sure that you're doing all the things that you need to do. And unfortunately, it's just going to take time to wire it in, and it'll be a new way. I don't think it's going to be the way it was, but it's just going to take time to rewire the supply chain and for the new normal.
So we're nearing the end of our time today, and I didn't mention this before the podcast, but I want to kind of go through a rapid fire sort of question solution sort of deal. So I think that the biggest question, and I've been on a few calls with members, and the biggest question is like, okay, there's all this crazy stuff happening. What are you going to do about it? So I'm going to ask that of us. And then at the end, I want to find out from you guys what your opinion is on how our members can help do that. So I have a list. One, workforce. What are we doing?
So we're doing, as you know, we're doing a lot of training, career path development. We're really doubling down, tripling down on our partnership with USO, the veterans communities. All of that is helpful. But it is a very, very large challenge. It's the number one challenge facing the industry. And so we need to continue to work at it, continue to bring tools online. I think at the end of the day, what we actually have to do, and people don't like to talk about it, is we need to take a step back and say, what is it inherently about the way this industry operates and the way they manufacture that could be changed to make it a more attractive place to work? And I'm talking about, 2 consecutive days off in the manufacturing floor. I'm talking about more flexible scheduling. A lot of these things have been talked about over the years. I think we got to get much more serious about it.
Lee, what about from a policy perspective and workforce?
That's a tougher one in the current environment that we're in, because a part of the infrastructure package that was rolled out includes some really aggressive labor policy changes that would really change what we've seen over the Department of Labor significantly. And so it would encourage the PRO Act. It includes that. So, in effect, the card check that we've seen before. And so all these different things, paid leave, $15 minimum wage. And there are a lot of issues in there that would certainly impact our members from large, medium, and small members. And so, that coupled with the extended unemployment is really, really challenging. And so we're going to have to push back. We're going to have to talk about why that doesn't work for our industry and what that means for our workforce and what that means when we're trying to get product out the door and onto the shelves for customers.
So I think Lee did a good job of ticking off some of the elements. It's this mindset in the workforce that we're managing in the 1950s with all these command and control, the minimum wage, these are some of the things that are throwbacks to the 1950s. And in an environment where, as we talked about, we need more flexibility, more adaptability. We're in a very competitive global environment, and we talked about what the impact is on the baking industry, which people don't think about as being impacted by the global supply chain. It's 2021, and you look at the workforce of today and what the workforce of the future is, we need to be looking forward instead of dragging back this 1950s, 1960s era workplace policies. And it's really disappointing that this administration seems to be stuck in that mindset. It's making it much harder.
Soybean oil. When I hear supply continuity, I get a little nervous. I'm sure our members also get pretty nervous whether they're supplying that soybean oil or they're using it. What are we doing about it?
Well, right now we're talking with other stakeholders, putting a coalition together, thinking about what strategy is needed to help with that volatility, right? So we're, of course, no one likes, none of the bakers, none of us like higher ingredient costs, but certainly when we're talking about supply, we have to be strategic in thinking about, whether it's soybean oil or other vegetable oils that are also being impacted, how we can help stabilize that. So, analyzing that, talking and sharing with USDA and EPA. We're going to have those conversations. We also have to look at, not only on the federal level, but on the state level, some of the standards that have been put in place are also a factor. And this California standard is really impactful. We're hearing that this may also occur in Oregon and Washington. A New England state may be looking at it, and Canada is also considering that kind of standard. And so then as you get more demand and more restrictions, that's going to be even more impactful as that demand continues.
When we're talking about soybean oil, are there specific things that we're going to be requesting regarding, Leah used the phrase earlier, food instead of food before fuel? Is there something that these levers that can be pulled, or it sounds like we'll have an opportunity with the USDA comments, or kind of what's going on? Because I know that members are super nervous about this one.
Right. No, I think I would say there's one thing that we can do. We need to do a little bit more work on it. We can ask for an emergency declaration or waiver. And I have to be really clear. We're all moving towards the second generation of clean diesel fuel. We're the third or fourth largest fleet of trucks in the country. It's in our own interest to do that. So this isn't, bakers versus growers or bakers versus, the producers of soy oil. We're in this moment in time where we need that flexibility. So an emergency declaration that prioritizes food for the short period of time over, meeting these aggressive targets on second generation clean diesel may be in order. And that's not going to be an easy lift. Just to be honest with you, it's off trend with this administration. They would like to double down and triple down. But at this moment in time, we need that flexibility of an emergency declaration to sort of halt and then make sure that the domestic food supply is taken care of first.
So, an emergency declaration is something that would help, but I think that we also, it's going to be really important when we think through our strategy. Unfortunately, anything that we can do on any of these fronts, whether it be the logistics, whether it be the commodity markets, whether it be the workforce, there's no snap your fingers solution. And so we have to think about this for the long haul. We have to think about our future and how to be most efficient and how to make sure we increase the stability in the markets. We have to think about how to increase our workforce. We have to think about ways that we can help stabilize and make the logistics more efficient. And so, there's probably short-term and long-term goals that we need to reach, and we're still working through that. We don't want to reveal too much on this podcast, but we'll share it. And the other thing I would say is there is a great opportunity for our members to participate. Their voices are so important. When Robb and I and the rest of the team are hearing from the members, when we're reaching out, we're hearing the kind of hurdles that they're facing day to day. That's so important for us to know, but it's also important for policymakers to know. And so on June the 16th, we're going to be having a fly-in that's going to be focusing on the commodity issues and the workforce issues and how those really merge together, how they impact the overall industry health. And so it's a great opportunity for folks to engage and share their stories, paint that picture so that policy makers understand what our industry is facing.
And I would echo what Lee said. There's no better advocate for the industry than the industry. Lee and I and the team, we do a great job. I'm not diminishing or disrespecting them. There's no better advocate for the industry than the industry, but that requires stepping in and writing the letters and making the phone calls and doing the Zoom calls, and that's what our job is to make that as easy, as efficient as possible so they can tell their story.
Yeah, I should have mentioned that our June 16th fly-in is virtual. So they literally can sit in their office and participate, which is terrific. And I think it gives everybody an opportunity to really be vested in the solutions that we're striving for.
I think that's a great place to wrap up. And I really appreciate you all helping us understand all the various issues that are at play. And not only that, but what ABA is working on to help mitigate these issues and how ABA members can participate in advocating for the baking industry.
And I know I didn't get to the rapid fire questioning on like logistics and gluten and everything else. I mean, it's just like we would need probably many more podcasts, which we actually will have as we're unpacking this. And we also look forward to having members onto the show to talk about what they're dealing with. Small, medium, large. I think everybody has a story to tell in how they're being impacted by everything. And so I feel like this podcast is a good place for them to air their stories in addition to telling the stories to the folks on Capitol Hill. Yeah. So with that, thank you, Robb and Lee.
Yeah, thanks for having us back on the podcast, and can't wait to see how it all turns out.
Let us know what you thought of the show by emailing hello@americanbakers.org or leave us a voicemail at baketothefuture.org. And don't forget to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts: Apple, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Amazon Music, or Ghana.
Bake to the Future is brought to you by the American Bakers Association in partnership with Human Factor. To hear upcoming and past episodes, go to baketothefuture.org. Bake to the Future is produced by Haley Blumenreich. Audio engineer is Blake Alton. And A Slice of the Action is written by the American Bakers Association's Government Relations Team.